Yes. Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Sofia Rolim. It's a pleasure to be moderating this incredible session on film as politics. Let me introduce our amazing panelists. We will be starting with an introduction by Håkon Tveit, who is the program director for documentaries at the Bergen International Film Festival, BIF, where he also runs the Cine Latino, which is the Latin American Film Festival. Håkon also teaches Latin American history at the University of Bergen. And we're also joined by Elena Alviar, who is a professor at Sciences Po Paris at the School of Law. And Elena has done amazing work and published on law and literature, has an upcoming text on law and films, and also uses art in her teaching of law, which will be very interesting to hear about. We also have here with us Victoria Schmidt, who is a professor and a researcher at the Center for the History of Science at Karl Franzen University. She works on film and their interplay with social politics and public care, particularly the issue of public health, as well as films that have children as their main audience and public. So I'm very excited to hear from you all, and let's start with Håkon, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I'll be talking mostly about what we do at the festival at BIF and Cine Latino. So my angle will not be very academic, but more what we do with the audience and film. BIF is one of the big festivals of Norway and has focused especially on documentaries for many, many years. And we have different sections that are quite special, we feel, that highlight how we try to use film for, well, political or activist reasons. We have the section Checkpoints, which is a human rights competition in collaboration with the Rafto Foundation for Human Rights, which many of you might know, based here in Bergen. Wherein the award does not go to the filmmaker, but to the cause. So you would want the films to be effective and create the feeling of need for change, and they're all about human rights. The films there, documentaries. Like this year, for instance, we have a film called Igualada about Francia Marquez in that section typically. We also have Gulluglen, the golden owl. As many might know, the owl is the symbol of the university, and the golden owl is a competition about the best science documentaries. That's quite normal across the world. We do try to adjust the image that science documentaries are mostly made about natural science by, let's say, white men from the US, basically, which has dominated a lot of science documentary film festivals normally. So we want a broader scope. Then we have a school section, which I run, where we have, last year we had a bit more than 25,000 in attendance for kids coming to watch documentaries at the festival that is relevant to what they do at school. And they get introductions, they get educational materials, so they come prepared. They watch films together, and they have discussions, often with activists after the films. Like a couple of years back, we had a judge come from Poland to present Judges Under Pressure, where he is the star. Obviously, none of the Norwegian kids have heard of him, but after 90 minutes of him being the hero of the documentary, and he comes on stage, it's hugely effective, and everybody's suddenly interested in Polish politics, which they were not necessarily before. So that we like. We have a climate section as well, and we have what that has been running for many years. We have a section that was called 20 years ago was called Gay and Lesbian Propaganda Nights. It's about sexuality and gender in different ways. It's changing names, always being discussed and thought about, but it's a very important strand as well. In terms of threads, like we would move where the best films are this year, post-colonialism is looking like a big part of the festival, as well as nature and yeah, species, habitat, etc. We're very fond of the collective idea of cinema, of watching films together and to have discussions and talk about the things in the films afterwards. We have great faith in the power of the narrative of the films to engage people in important subjects, and also the visual and actually also the sound of cinema. This year we have a film from the Himalayas about moths and how the climate change affect them. That is like visually and sound wise unbelievable. Nocturne, go see it. Okay, yeah, I wanted to watch to show a few clips, a trailer of a film we had in the competition for science documentary last year from Brazil, actually. And it's called Biocentrics, and it kind of mixes then the climate section and the science. And we had a discussion afterwards with what's it called, the board or the Council of Biotechnology, Biocentrics it's called. Maybe.
How would you reinvent some part of our world with nature as your model? That's the beginning of biomimicry.
It's based not on what we can extract from the natural world, but on what we can learn from it.
It asks you to look closer, the way little kids do. How do you get nature's intelligence into the tools that inventors use every day?
カワセミのデザインに関しましても、全くトライアンドエローで試行錯誤でして出してきた結論が、結果としてカワセミそこになってきたっていうことですね。
A field in which, biologists work with inventors.
33 tonnes do lixo que a gente produz no mundo vem de embalagens. E aqui está tudo resolvido. A natureza resolveu esse problema de uma maneira incrível. Resíduo e recursos são a mesma coisa na natureza. Lixo é uma invenção humana.
People don't like to believe it's that simple. All of it can be changed and modified, but not everyone likes that thought either, right?
Our world is still based on machine metaphors.
Tem gente que é mais fácil acreditar numa máquina do que acreditar na natureza. Todas essas coisas aí que as pessoas estão fazendo vai perder o preço, porque o valor vai estar numa planta, o valor vai estar num copo de água.
I don't care what country you're a part of, or what religion you're a part of, or what political ideology you're a part of. You're not immune to natural selection.
Yeah, so that was super interesting and inspiring as a documentary to talk about and to try to engage and open the minds of people. And then I would like one more clip, which is super short, about El Equipo, a documentary that was in the science section as well, but it also links with the human rights section checkpoints, because it's about the groundbreaking work that was done after the end of the dictatorship in Argentina, the last one, where forensic anthropological forensic in English, is that around there? And how actually a young team managed to change a field, and it's something that is still affecting the same science, let's say, today, no? Okay, it's, yeah, El Equipo, please.
It's not easy to do what we do. Every skeleton we find adds more knowledge of this system of repression.
Nos encontramos en presencia de otro terrorismo, el del Estado.
A través de la reconstrucción de la vida de una persona, contribuimos en esta justicia.
There's a lack of accountability. In some cases, there's cover-up.
También tenemos que poner nuestro grano de arena para que esto salga a la luz.
much. In addition to documentary films, we definitely also have faith in fiction, that there can be a lot of reality in fiction. And last year, one of the most popular films at both BIF and Cine Latino was Argentina 1985, which is a dramatization about the trials basically coming after this, based on this science. And of course, then you created a lot more awareness, like packed audiences, and but also you would make more people want to go see the documentary El Juicio, 3 hours, which we would also gladly screen. I would like in my university life, I've focused quite a bit on Cuba. And I think in terms of law, one typical example that we would one would mention as something that managed to change something in a field that is frequently being mentioned this week at this excellent conference is fresa de chocolate, strawberry and chocolate, which one often says that kind of changed the well, not entirely, but changed a lot of people's mentality about homosexuality in Cuba, which was a really, really bad chapter of the revolutionary government in the 60s and 70s. It did come after actual change in law, though. But the combination of the two, not bad. That's 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hakan. That was amazing. And thank you also for the trailers. Definitely want to watch both of those films now. And now let's hear it from Elena, please.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't have to. So thank you so much. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here, especially this year that it's the 10 years. So I actually centered I'm going to center my very brief comments on using art to teach law. And I'm going to do it signaling two basic ideas. The first one is, it's very important for me for students to engage in autonomous learning. And how do they engage in autonomous learning? Well, they have to have read something, and then you have to use either literature, cinema, or art to trigger specific questions. So the first big idea that I try to use is, what are those things that data cannot transmit and can only be transmitted, for example, through literature? So if you're going to talk about land concentration, a fantastic novel is Pedro Páramo, which is a very old novel, but there you can see the amount of power that the landowner has. He can decide over the life or death of the people who live in the town, etc. I also like to use a more recent novel by an American writer. Her name is Rachel Kushner. The novel is called Telex from Cuba. And in that novel, the power of neo-colonialism is very evident. In pre-Castro Cuba, what was the amount of power they had to have rules or not have them, how they divided the country, etc. But a second very important idea about law is, how do we teach critical thinking about law? And here I'm going to mention three. The first one is the indeterminacy of law. So when law doesn't give answers, but only asks more questions. And here, a perfect movie that I only use, of course, clips of it, is Anatomy of a Fall. So Anatomy of a Fall, the very famous movie of last year, is a movie that is more about questions than about definitive answers. And so that's a very important critical tool to transmit. But also a second idea is when law creates burdens instead of liberate. And there's a very famous movie that is also a beautiful novel by Claudia Piñeiro. The movie is in Netflix, and it's called Elena Sabe. And it's about this old woman who has Parkinson's. She's trying to investigate if her daughter was murdered. And part of it shows the indignities of age in access to health. It has many, in access to transportation, in access to the truth, but it's very particular about a woman who is older, who is alone, and who's trying to traverse the city of Buenos Aires on her own. So, you know, when law creates, and there's a very famous scene when she's trying to access drug for her illness, and the doctor is just putting obstacles and obstacles and obstacles. And then the third and final idea is to open the conversation between the interaction of the global and the local. And here, I also make my students go to exhibits because I have the actually rare privilege of teaching in a city that has many exhibits. Last year, I made them go to an exhibit by a very famous US artist. Her name is Zoe Leonard. And the exhibit was called To the River, Al Rio. And it was taking photographs of the Rio Grande, which divides Mexico from the United States. She would take pictures from the United States side to the Mexican side and vice versa. So from the United States, from the Mexican side to the United States side, you see army, you know, these big boats, fully filled with a lot of guns, etc. And when the pictures were taken from the US side to the Mexican side, people are having a barbecue, they're washing their clothes on the river, etc. And I pair that with a reading of dependency theory, where it's very evident the differences in power, resources, access to law in these two cases. So those were the examples I wanted to give, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Elena. That was amazing to hear. Please, Victoria.
A chap, the last presenter, and really films shape a lot of our practices. Even we could not pay attention, and it's probably makes film even more powerful. But really, we are very open, and simultaneously, we don't know how films shape us. We don't know who are those people who make decision which film we would like to watch. Yeah, so it's films, it's a little bit like the black box. And especially if you think about the films related to the professionals who have power on our life, like lawyers, educators, physicians, how many films about physicians have you watched? Could you think a little bit about it, how these films structured your relationship, your expectations for physicians, your idea about being treated by physicians? Yeah, it's all educated. So very long period of time, I taught the course Education in Films and Films in Education. And it was two-part course. The first was about making students more sensitive to very different ways how films manipulate audiences. And the second one was how to use films in order to improve cultural literacy of students in different groups. And my impression from teaching this course was that what we really need to do, we need to move beyond the boundaries of national films, because mostly I have international audience among students, and it was very useful when each of the students from each of the country was able to demonstrate the film and to provide culturally sensitive analysis. Why? Because it was important to understand how films shapes what I could say our regimes of authenticity and this different level of authenticity. And very soon I moved to the idea that the very umbrella conception of useful films, which was introduced in 2011 by British sociologist Hacknell, I presume that it's about all of the films, because actually each of the films could be useful in one for another purposes. That's the question is how to use it. In a negative way, when we criticize it to demonstrate how films is manipulative and destructive, or we would like to demonstrate how films is useful and we would like to attract attention, because many of good films remain to be undermined because these films require somebody who would be like a broker between the audience and the people. And my very favorite example is that I would like to work with a girl. So it was like the movie Therapy, 10 years old, and she was under the pressure of the gender prescriptions. And we would like to watch Mulan, the first part. And her interpretation of this film was absolutely aligned with the normal Disney understanding of the film. And we need to compare Mulan with another one, I don't remember which one, Sleeping Beauty, I presume yet. And only after this comparison, she was able to recognize the difference. So I think that one of the main tasks for those who use the film in teaching practices or in working with some audiences is how to be a kind of broker between the film and audience. And the very last activity, even it took 5 years of my life, it was like moving, in the past of the films, because I think that many of forms of consuming films, they are changed. For instance, at the very beginning of useful films for children, these films were very closely connected with puppet shows. Even more, the very first films produced in the United States, they were based upon puppet shows. Then it was television. Then it was like computer games. So forms of the films for children are very different, they change. But as for the discursive processes, they remain the same. Actually, if you would like to explain the child through the film, what is a cancer and how this child would be treated because he has or she has cancer. And there are some films, you could find it on YouTube. It's a lot of films, it's like plenty of films. It looks like the films which were produced by Ulmer for the Tuberculosis Association in late 30s for the children about tuberculosis. Yeah, so in order to demonstrate that disease is not like something which you could not fight, but it's like the enemy, and you should be equipped by a weapon from the side of the doctors, and etc., etc. And really, all these organismistic and vitalist ideas remain to be reproduced. So the history of films, especially useful films, remain to be one of the part of understanding, interpreting, and criticizing and revising the legacy of these films. And yeah, probably I need to stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was super interesting. And I think that there are a lot of common threads in the things that you have spoken, especially this that you talked about now, about this role of being the broker between the film and the audience, or the audience and arts in general. I think that what Elena mentions that she does in her classes is such an amazing
because the
example
first clip for me was very similar with interval films, which should address the audience in terms of the periphery, which the periphery you would like to approach.
And I think that the initiatives of Beef and Cine Latino also play this role. There's something that I kept thinking when I was listening to you guys, and in Brazil, there's a big discussion on this, is that we have such a lively cinema scene, but often you go to the cinema and 90% of the options are blockbusters. And so there's this big discussion of, well, this is what the audience wants, but to what extent, if that's what we keep feeding the audience after years and years, that's what they will have also the tools to be able to engage with. So to which extent should we push something else, which might be not so popular, but give them different tools, and just on the real big importance of these brokers and the people who select the films and play this role of, which I think is very much the role of a teacher, to do this mediation, no? But let's hear it from the audience, who must have the insightful questions, I'm sure. Do we have the catch box?
Yeah, hi. So first of all, I think this is terrific. And I guess this raises an interesting question about the needs of writing and also teaching. And I know that in my own work, when I'm not doing law, I teach the history of social thought. And I'm limited to works up to 1950. And because somebody else teaches the course for that, right? So one of the questions that we've been dealing with in this course over the years is, when did social theory start to look like it looks now, which is to say, turgid abstract stuff written by, and so every year I try to push my class for thinking that maybe we would learn more from novels about the 19th century than like early social theory. And what's so fascinating is by the time I get them as PhD students, they just resist this thought. They want a really sharp line, right, between fiction and social science, or between the humanities and social sciences. And I guess I'm wondering, what everybody in the room is doing about that. And this partly comes out of this discussion we had in the last session about AI, right? Because that goes now to the question of the kind of lines between social sciences and humanities on one side and sort of science generated knowledge on the other. And the more we think in terms of silos, the more all of these things become challenges to our ordinary practices. And I'm wondering if this is also a kind of challenge about whether social sciences put itself off in a lot of really useful knowledge, right, that would actually engage people more than the kind of programs that we give them and take them to.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the very insightful comment. So I have two questions. How does the presentation of queer identities in contemporary filmmaking challenge or reinforce traditional notions of agency and consent? The second question is, how do films contribute to the shaping or reshaping of collective memory?
I have a question about the more popular culture dimension of this. As a law teacher, one of the things I notice is that the image of law that students come into law school with does not correspond to Dutch law. They all think we have juries, for instance. So there are all these very powerful, basically Hollywood and now big streaming images that really shape how well not just law but also politics. All these things are mediated by popular culture, and what do we do with that?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the fiction non-fiction balance and the way that you're using the different media. There's been kind of such an emphasis on documentary. And now a lot of the indigenous filmmakers are more it's sort of fiction, much more. So yeah, just to ask you to reflect on fiction, non-fiction resources.
Sorry. So yeah, I wanted because you talked about the possibilities of arts and film to further certain conversations, but I wanted to ask about the possibilities of backlash in the classroom, and I'm thinking about that because several years ago when I was teaching in Guatemala, I incorporated arts exhibitions and films in an intercultural class. And at the end of the semester, I was called by disciplinary measures by the head of the department because, and then I understood the composition of the classroom, and it was majority of religious fanatics, like evangelicals and Catholics, where that reacted very badly to those kind of material. So how do we do when that happens? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I found this very, very fascinating and coming from the group of how to contextualize it into our own experiences and narratives. We're discussing the questions of narratives, identity, and so forth. Where, for example, our history is often told from the northern. I like the idea when you look at the taken from the Mexican side, what you see, and then you go to the other side. That looks quite more than and here coming to the lived experience of people. I found it quite interesting when we were doing some work on the political economy of my country, Zimbabwe, and we were going back to the colonial period and the construction, how the economy was, the social construct, the thinking behind I guess what that informed the thinking that crafted the economy that we had. And so when we begin to see the image, and up to now, in recently South Africa, we're talking about the GNU, who is going to be a partner in the GNU. And some arguments in the whole song was saying, one part of the decisions were not being made by the ordinary people in South Africa, but by rating agents how these metaphors actually end up now defining our own, even the teaching of economics. When I went to economic school, basically, classes like political economy, risk of economic thought, all those things from a point of view, not this fundamentalist interpretation of economics. It basically says everything about the market without even forgetting what this market is. What is the market? So I think this is quite powerful and quite profound. And I very much so relate with this. I think the more we do these things, that we feel that it's important. We tell our own history. They say there's enough problem these days. And unless the lions learn to write the story or
And thank you everyone for the really great questions. We're running well on time, so we should have 3 minutes each to answer. Does anyone want to start?
I talked the most already.
I can start if
Okay,
you wish.
please,
Okay.
Elena.
So thank you so much for such wonderful questions. I'd like to address Kim's question about genres of writing and teaching. And I'm really interested in this division between fiction and nonfiction because actually most of these writers do a lot of research before writing it. So Rachel Kushner, famously, because I heard an interview with her, she went to Cuba, she saw the documents, she read, her parents had been, expats in Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. So building on the research that they have done is as important as if you're reading, I don't know, a text that talks about the numbers of inequality or how the US expats behaved in Cuba. And so I think that accepting that there is that background is really important. But the other one is the idea of narration that also is related to Rachel's point. I'm really fascinated on the fact that in law, we narrate things that border into fiction, but not in bad faith, right? So I have a very short story, which is that I went to a place where there was a huge massacre in Colombia. It was a commemoration, which is called Bojayá. And in the main city, which is Quibdó, in front of the victim, there's a victim units office. In front of the victim units office, there were lawyers sitting in little desks where victims would come and tell them their story. And their story was partly fit into the law of victims, partly it didn't. And the lawyers had to translate a series of events into the language of law. Now, are they doing fiction? Not necessarily. They are adapting a narration to the language of law. And I think even in our lives, we are narrating, and it's not fiction in the sense of falseness. It's fiction in the sense that we're bringing together ideas. So I think that we should try to undermine this division between like fiction and nonfiction, particularly in law. And then the question about traditional representations and films I actually think that, and here I want to come back to, you have to have a very clear pedagogical idea before you engage with this, right? You can't just show a movie and expect the students, if you're doing it in class, right? Or the participants to be more egalitarian about it, to just take your conclusions. There has to be a previous reading. You have to make specific questions. And sometimes very traditional films bring the questions about, look at this way that trans population is being represented. Look, what are the mistakes there? What should be different ways in which and the same thing with memory. There is this memory of the way that history happened, but it actually didn't happen that way. By the way, the movie 1985 has been criticized a bit by that, because of that. So, and then I think, the very interesting, two last questions. The issue of backlash, I think, is also related to that. If they have a previous reading and you have enough questions, in which you lead them to say, listen, I'm not showing you this film because I have specifically this agenda. I'm showing you this film to see that, for example, abortion is an issue of public health. So, or to, I think using films is really important, and I use films and literature and art in my classes, but you have to do a lot of work beforehand in order for the students to really autonomously get to the answer, or else they think you're proselytizing. You're going with your own agenda as a bulldozer. And the question of the political economy, I think that one of the best things about using literature or cinema or art is that it gives context to knowledge, right? Knowledge, you can see this is the way that, for example, the political economy of South Africa works, Zimbabwe works, Colombia works, etc. So I would answer with that.
Thank you. I think that covered a lot of the things that were mentioned by the audience. That was really great. Victoria, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would like to comment because probably it stems from my experience of teaching with the films. And I think that according to knowing students, I presume that we need to teach them narrative analysis before we would like to use films, or probably simultaneously when we would like to demonstrate the films. We need to teach them how to apply different methods of narrative analysis. I studied, for instance, with Rick Altman and 3 types of narratives, and it was very useful because it's possible to demonstrate using very short animations, mostly unknown. It also, beyond the opposition between fiction, non-fiction, which I find a little bit, artificial in many ways, also because of this idea that fiction is much more essentialistic and et cetera, et cetera. But I think beyond this opposition, there are many different others like this known, unknown films, films with good reputation, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that students should be prepared how to work with different forms of narrative analysis. So it's very useful. Another point that we need to know that how these films shape our media emotions. We need to analyze our media emotions. We need to know our personal experience, our collective experience, what is the relation between our personal media emotions and collective, and what our collective identity in terms of the film consuming. And in this way, I think that my division of films is in 3 different cohorts, generations, because it's my division. The first, it was like hopes and fears, and it's very interwar period. Then it was like risk and needs, and it was a period when films were aimed to rationalize our behavior and try to watch the films produced in the 60s. So you would be annoyed by this idea of rationalization of our behavior. And then, I mean, it's a very long period of time when we watch films about dreams and nightmares. So all of them are very, in very particular way, deal with dystopian scenarios. And so even it would be the element, but what to do? So really, there are kind of global shapes of this. And there is a historical continuities and changes, and we need to discuss these things with students too. So if you are ready to do it, use films, because normally I never met students who would be quit before going to my class. And the very last, it was perfect question about the collective memory. Very sensitive. Yeah, I watch with my Czech students a lot of films about the 1968. It's actually now celebrate this event about the intervention of Warsaw Pact army in Czechoslovakia. And it was very important to demonstrate how to work through this trauma and compare different films. So I think it's also the question about the very different generational approaches, how different filmmakers make this. So and compare this, for instance, with other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see from Håkan.
That's I guess a lot is covered. Could share some experiences. What you say about the backlash and so forth. I have plenty of experience of people not being happy about what we screen for kids at VIF. Because we always want someone not to be happy. And I think in very, very intense situation at the cinema where you have people who are furious about how homosexuality is portrayed as something good. For instance, we always try to make sure that the students feel that they are listened to, even though we disagree with what they say. We don't accept threats to anyone or any other aggressions, but we always aim to have very, very open conversations. But we do know that there will be like reaction at home also for some. And we push the limits on different things, I think. Last year we had one film on AI creating deep fake porn, and which is of course the most, like many things, the most common thing if you use something badly, it's to make women's lives worse. This showing kind of the really, really bad potential of AI. We were very kind of insecure and had a lot of conversations about whether we should have this conversation with and screen this film for schools. It's quite the horror film, Another Body it's called. About a young woman who is fighting and clearly showing that law is not even close to helping. And while considering programming the film, we also found out that in Norway it's the same. It's like not even close. So if the law is not helping, how does it help to screen the film? We try to create conversations and have it also in the checkpoints competition and so forth, and to create attention and change law. Yeah. In terms of what kind of films, like how like fiction, documentary, we love undermining the limits, but also then to discuss, to have the students discuss before and after what is actually fiction, what is documentary, and then to discuss also like bad films. What is wrong with this? I think is very good. And we try to challenge them, have something accessible, like with a conventional language, and something more tricky that they're not used to also make them a bit more used to watching things that are not normally screened. Also in terms of who they meet as filmmakers, we want these Norwegian kids to meet a young South Sudanese woman who's made an excellent film about South Sudanese politics that is not about South Sudan being a miserable country only, but like something they will be able to relate to and widen the scope of how they see stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Håkon. Thank you to our amazing audience, and let's have a round of applause for our panelists.